Welcome to the Cerini Nonprofit Connection, a monthly webinar series where we provide you, the nonprofit leadership, access to some of the top leaders serving the nonprofit sector. In today's environment, nonprofits are facing significant challenges from a legal, compliance, marketing, fundraising, regulatory, and just about every other front you can think of. It's becoming overwhelming. Unfortunately, we don't know what we don't know. In our ongoing effort to bring value to the sector, we have developed this, the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. This month, we're in for a treat. We have Melissa Greenberger, an attorney with us from Pro Bono Partnership, an organization that brings some of the top legal talent to work directly with nonprofit organizations to assist them with legal issues they are facing. So Melissa, first of all, thank you very much for doing this. So why don't you kind of start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and about Pro Bono Partnerships?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Ken, for inviting me to be here today. I'm excited to be your first guest on this webinar series.
Yeah, it's a new thing, so we figured if we're going to do it, let's do it right and bring the best up front.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm an attorney with Pro Bono Partnership. I work out of our Long Island office. Pro Bono Partnership is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're celebrating our 21st year this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we provide services in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, minus New York City 5 boroughs. So I'm in the Long Island office. Like I said, we're out here in Suffolk County. And
well, you said minus the New York City and 5 boroughs. Is there an option for nonprofits who are in that space?
So there is an organization similar to what we do. It's called Lawyers Alliance. And so if somebody from that area, New York City 5 boroughs, calls us, we usually refer them there.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
So what we do is we provide free transactional legal services to nonprofits. And when I say transactional, I mean anything other than litigation. So if a nonprofit is being sued or wants to sue somebody, that's outside the scope of what we do, but we provide the business transactional needs. And as you know, nonprofits are corporations, and they have the same types of legal needs that for-profit businesses have.
I think sometimes nonprofits actually have more acute legal needs because you're dealing with a different space and different sets of rules and regulations that the for-profit sector just doesn't have to deal with.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, nonprofits don't think of themselves as businesses. They think, well, I'm just a nonprofit. I don't have to worry about getting my lease reviewed, or, I'll just sign this contract. It's no big deal. But for-profit business owners would never do things like that. So a lot of what we do is educate, and we educate nonprofits and explain to them, what they don't know can actually hurt them. And we want to let them know things that they should be aware of so that they can strengthen their infrastructure and function more effectively.
I think also what you find in the nonprofit sector, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think nonprofits tend to bring people onto their boards who might not have the specialization in the area where the nonprofit needs it, and they just rely upon an attorney on their board to provide them with all the legal advice that they need.
Right. So sometimes, a nonprofit founder says, oh, well, I have 3 friends. They're my best friends. I trust them, so I'll put them on my board. And like you say, they don't necessarily have the skills that they need to serve as a board member. We often say you really need to think about making that commitment to join the board. And if there is an attorney on the board, that attorney may not want to serve as the attorney for the nonprofit. They may be interested in the mission or just doing volunteer work. So oftentimes, there might be an attorney who might not have the expertise to handle some of the corporate governance issues or things that the nonprofit's dealing with. And that's something that, we step in.
I guess that's where you come into play.
Yeah. So we'll step in and, we'll work with the organization. And oftentimes attorneys who do sit on the boards are so grateful that we're able to help them with the things that they don't have the experience in.
So now you mentioned you do everything but litigation work. So
Correct.
what does that really entail? I mean, everything is such a broad term.
It is broad. So more specifically, the business legal needs. So we do things such as contract review. If a nonprofit's going to sign a contract for a new program, we'll help review the contract, make sure they understand what they're obligating themselves to do and what the other side has to do for them. If they're signing a lease, either for space or renting out space to a different group, we'll review leases for them. Real estate, purchase, sales of property. So if a nonprofit runs a homeless shelter and they're going to buy a new building, we can help them with that. Things like intellectual property. A lot of nonprofits have developed logos. They don't necessarily have that logo trademark protected. They might want to obtain that protection. Nonprofits that do programs and create curriculum for those programs, we talk to them about copyright law. for nonprofits. Many nonprofits now have websites. Almost everybody has a website. Yep. They'll have a website. They're usually on Facebook. So now you're dealing with social media. Do you have releases to put the photos that you're using up on your social media? Do you have releases for the photos on your website? Does your website have a terms of use policy, a privacy policy? Those are things that people look at now when they go onto the website. Not everybody wants to read those terms of use and privacy policy, but at least people would have the ability to know how their information is being collected, stored, used. We handle things like corporate governance issues. So probably one of the most common issues we handle is helping people review their bylaws, make sure they're up to date and current with the laws. New York law changed in 2014. A lot of nonprofits don't know that, or yeah, they knew the law changed, but they never did anything about it.
I think that's one of the places that we probably see a big issue in the nonprofit sector. I think a lot of nonprofit organizations kind of, put it in place, put it on a shelf, and kind of forget it even exists. Right. And that needs to be a living, breathing document that gets reviewed on a regular basis, especially when there have been changes in as you said, the nonprofit law, which actually happened in 2014, and there have been amendments to that law since 2014. So. Yeah. If they're not following the Nonprofit Revitalization Act, there's all sorts of problems that come into play.
Right, especially the conflict of interest policies now require for every New York nonprofit. A lot of organizations, either they still don't know that, or they knew it, they just took something off the website that they found, or off the internet, they looked it up, conflict of interest policy, and then they adopted that, but it might not be, the perfect fit for their organization. So, it's not one size fits all when it comes to legal documents for your nonprofit. So we'll do a lot of, again, like I said, education. We'll help them draft those policies, whistleblower policies. And that bylaws document really is your governing document.
Yeah, one of you mentioned conflict of interest. One of the things that I've seen in the nonprofit space a lot is within their bylaws, they have a nonprofit provision within the bylaws, and then they go out and adopt a separate conflict of interest policy. Mm-hmm. And what's in the bylaws doesn't match out to the conflict of interest policy. So There also needs to be the marrying of certain policies that they have within an organization.
Right.
That's all stuff you help with?
Yep, we'll help with all those sorts of projects. The other really common project that we handle is employment law issues. So every nonprofit that has at least one employee has those employment law issues, just like for-profit businesses. We help with employee handbook reviews, reviewing job descriptions, making sure that the workforce is classified properly. A lot of people think, oh, well, I have a part-time employee, so I just pay them as an independent contractor. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's a whole analysis that goes into whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee, and we help them go through that. We do things like waivers, releases, anything that handles that the nonprofit has to deal with employees. We also do offer letters. So if a nonprofit, we've helped a lot of clients now, they're going to hire their first executive director or hire their first employee, and they have no idea what they even need to put into place to do that. Right. So making sure that they understand what's required when you hire your first employee, getting that into place.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. I have to say, I work with great organizations because nonprofits really do good work, and I learn about new things every day.
So can any nonprofit organization avail themselves to your service, or is it limited?
Well, we typically work with the small to medium-sized nonprofits. Small, we don't have a hard line for what their budget has to be. Our criteria is that they are serving the public need, providing an essential assistance. So it could be, groups that work in the arts, group that works with the environment, social services, human services, organizations that work with youth, children, seniors, veterans, individuals with disabilities. So really organizations that are providing essential services to the community that would otherwise not be able to afford legal assistance. So we don't want organizations to say, well, I have to do my bylaws. That might cost me $15,000. Now I have to cut my programs. Right. We want to avoid doing that. So we want to help them so that we'll handle their legal needs so they can focus on their mission. Is
there any cost associated with this, or it's free?
So the legal work is free. The exception is if a nonprofit or if a group wants to start a new nonprofit, there's a $500 administrative startup fee that we charge. We really walk them through a lot of those, questions, and they need a lot more, assistance to really start the nonprofit correctly. So $500 for those groups. Otherwise, the legal work is done free.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we like I mentioned, we don't work with the groups in New York City 5 boroughs. And we also really look at the board of directors. So we want to make sure that there's the 3 independent directors is typically what we look at, and make sure that the board is aware that they're coming to us for help, so that we work with the nonprofit through the board of directors.
And now you do all this work yourself.
I wish I could do all this myself. No. So pro bono partnership, in addition to providing the free legal work, the other part of our mission is to provide pro bono opportunities to attorneys. And we do that with attorneys in law firms and in corporate legal departments. So last year we worked with about 1,400 volunteer attorneys.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really amazing. They've donated, I think we estimated about 22,000 hours of free legal work for our clients.
That's a lot.
Over the tri-state area, that I said, we worked with about 800 nonprofit groups. And I think we valued our services at about $9.4 million. So think about $9.4 million that nonprofits can now spend on their services and missions. It's amazing when I think of those numbers.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What do you see out there as, I mean, you've talked about so many different legal areas. You kind of touched on probably about it seems like 40 or 50 different legal areas. What do you see as maybe the top 3 biggest legal areas that nonprofits are grappling with today?
So I think still the corporate governance issues, still organizations who haven't gone back and reviewed their bylaws or haven't enacted a conflict of interest policy or whistleblower policy. That's, one of our most popular projects, at least here on Long Island it is. Almost every group that I meet with when I go through the screening is, when have your bylaws been updated? And another thing is, have they looked at their certificate of incorporation? Because oftentimes we call it like mission creep. They start doing one thing, and then before you know it, the organization has grown. Now they're doing things that are not stated in their certificate of incorporation, or they're acting in areas where they're not permitted to act in.
I've seen some really fun examples of that. Mm-hmm. I worked with an organization where the organization had an attorney update their certificate of incorporation. And when the attorney updated their certificate of incorporation, they actually went to add an addendum to add a service, and they accidentally changed it and said, this is the only service they provide. So for a period of 3 years, the nonprofit organization was functioning way outside of its certificate of incorporation, which opens up all sorts of other concerns from a D&O insurance perspective and everything else.
Yeah, and especially if the organization is acting outside the scope of its certificate or outside the scope of its mission, it really even opens up the board to exposure.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
because on the D&O insurance, the D&O can deny coverage if something went wrong.
Right, and so one thing that we really recommend is when the board holds its annual meeting, pull out those documents. Don't let them be sitting in some corporate board book somewhere or on the bookshelf, like you said. Pull it out, look at it every year, make sure that what you're doing is in compliance with your certificate of incorporation. Look at your bylaws every year. Say, are we still functioning properly? Sometimes the bylaws will say we're going to have, a range of 6 to 10 directors, and all of a sudden now you're down to 5 directors. Well, now it could call into question every single decision that the board makes because they're acting, outside their bylaws. So look at those things every year. That's always a good practice. And I've heard you say something about, board meetings where at the top of the agenda, right?
You want to have the understanding of the mission. One of the things that I tell my clients all the time is, cut out your mission or put your mission somewhere where you can see it every day so that you understand why you're in the room and what you're doing.
Right.
And if you start to, it's really, and it comes back to your conflict of interest, statement that you were talking about. I mean, you're in the room not to help yourself. You're in the room to help the nonprofit organization. And if you kind of look at that mission and you remember why you're there, I think, it makes it a lot easier. Do you recommend that nonprofit organizations, since we're talking about some of the conflict of interest type stuff, do you recommend that they, on an annual basis, have a proactive policy where they get board members to disclose each year what their potential conflicts are, or only when a conflict pops up?
No, so not even recommend. Like the law requires that now. The amendments to the nonprofit, the amendments known as the Nonprofit Revitalization Act require that annually every board member sign a conflict of interest disclosure statement. So the policy should say that every year it's going to be reviewed, and if a conflict pops up in between, they really should be disclosing that to the entire board. And we sometimes, we tell organizations just having a conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. You have to go through an analysis, and that's what your conflict of interest policy is going to lay out. What you have to do to analyze whether this conflict is problematic or whether it's going to be okay. And as long as it's, documented and reviewed and thought about and discussed, it might not necessarily be a problem that you have to avoid.
Right. Right. So governance types issues is like one of the main reasons they come to you. What's another?
Yeah. Well, and they don't necessarily come to us for that.
Oh, they
They
don't?
might
Okay.
come to us and say, well, we have a contract we want reviewed. And then we look at their documents and say, well, by the way, do you know that your bylaws, haven't been updated since the
So when you go
Revitalization
in,
Act?
you do a comprehensive review of,
Yes, we'll go through the documents. So our process to apply for assistance is that they go onto our website, and there's a tab to request legal assistance. They fill out a questionnaire, and then we ask them to upload some documents. And one of those documents is a certificate of incorporation. One of them is the bylaws. So we'll have those documents when we meet at our first meeting, which we call a screening meeting, and kind of go through, all the documents, what their needs are based on that, and then talk about what they actually came in for.
I'm sorry, did you say screening or screening?
Screening. Yes, I don't scream. I'm not a screamer.
You gotta be doing this.
My kids might see differently, but I'm not a screamer. That's my clients now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What other issues are you seeing that the sector's grappling with?
Yeah. So employment is also probably another big issue up there. This year, New York made some major employment law changes.
Well, what makes it more difficult is you've got New York State making changes, you've got New York City making changes,
Right.
you've got federal government changes, so you've got all these different laws that aren't always melded together.
Right.
So that makes it much more difficult because now you've got 3 different jurisdictions, if you happen to be in New York City, that you have to worry about, and you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? How do I do this?
Right. And even if you might be working in New Jersey, but your employees sometimes come and work out of New York, well, now they might have to comply with some of those laws as well.
Right.
So New York enacted the paid family leave law earlier this year. So anybody who has at least one employee now has to have a paid family leave law policy. And just in October, the sexual harassment prevention policies are now required for every employer. And as well as having the policy, they also have to do training. So it's an annual training requirement, and organizations now have until next October, so October 2019, to get their employees trained for the first time, and then it's going to be annual training, and that training has to be interactive.
Do you do that training? Do you get involved in that training?
We have not yet got involved in that training. I guess that's still, up in the air as to whether volunteers would be interested in doing something like that, but we would take it on a case-by-case basis. But definitely, referring a lot of people to the New York State Department of Labor website. The New York State Department of Labor has put up model policies that people can adopt. They put up model training videos so people can use that. Again, I say,
I was going to say, do you
everything's
advise organizations to go and kind of download that stuff? Or, I mean, it kind of gets dangerous, I think, at times when organizations kind of go online and pull down documents and say, okay, we did it. We did what we're supposed to do.
Right. So, if you're in a pinch, they're provided by New York State. You can access them there. But we really are, advising our clients, at least, let us take a look at it. Let us have a volunteer review it for you. Because like I said, one size does not fit all, especially when it comes to nonprofits. You can have a nonprofit with 1 employee, you can have a nonprofit with 600 employees. So it's really not a one size fits all. And you don't want to obligate yourself to something that you might not have to do, that might be in a model policy somewhere.
Right.
One of my colleagues, she says that she had a client, a very small nonprofit client, a handful of employees, somehow downloaded off of the internet an employee handbook for an international corporation and adopted that as their employee handbook. And clearly, there are things that an international company has to, policies in place for their employees that a very small nonprofit is not going to need. But by adopting that as their handbook, now they're sort of obligating themselves to it. So we really do recommend that you have policies tailored to your needs.
One of the things that I read about recently in Long Island Business News is that we're seeing a downtick in the number of holiday parties that are taking place within not just nonprofits, but with all companies because of the whole Me Too situation and the sexual harassment. What do you have any advice for nonprofit organizations regarding that?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of articles about that as well. It seems like they're coming from everywhere. A lot of the employment law firms are sending them out. So people are having less parties, or people are looking at what they're doing at the parties. So some suggestions, I would say is, are you serving alcohol? That's, one question you need to have.
Is there a party without?
Well, it depends. Are you having a party after work hours? You're having it during the day. If you're doing a breakfast at work, maybe you're not serving alcohol. So, that's one consideration. Where are you having a party? Are you doing it on your premises? Are you using a caterer? Are you doing it off-site? one way to
Does
transfer.
each one of these bring up different risks and different concerns?
Right. So if you're having it elsewhere, if you're going to a caterer or something, it's one way to transfer your risk. If you do it on your own premises, someone falls because they've had a little bit too much to drink, you're going to open yourself up to more risk and more liability for, possibly their personal injury. So if you're having alcohol, if you're serving alcohol, think about, do you want to somehow limit the alcohol? Is it open bar and everybody can get as much as they want? Do you have a trained bartender or license who has insurance and maybe understands how to cut people off and can do it, rather than if you're the one serving, it's your best employee, you might not be so keen to say, no, you can't have that one. But really the management needs to set the tone. It needs to come from the top. So, limiting alcohol consumption, making sure that people are aware that this is still a work event, and the same rules that apply in the workplace apply at that office holiday party, or your fundraising gala, or your golf outing, or whatever event it is. The same rules really do apply.
You bring up fundraising events. Are there different risks and legal things that organizations should be thinking about when they're going out there and doing their fundraising events? And it could be, because I'm moving to a new venue or doing something in a venue. Are there risks that they need to worry about there? It could be, hey, I'm going to run a raffle, or I'm going to do a bingo, or I'm going to...
So I always tell people, I take the fun out of fundraising. There are so many rules and regulations around raffles, around bingo. People think it's like, we'll just do bingo. We'll raise money. We'll have a raffle off a TV, whatever it is. So in New York State, that's all regulated by the New York State Gaming Commission, which people have no idea about that oftentimes. So I send, a lot of links, information, tell people, go check on the website. This is how you have to do it properly. How they, decide to do it after that, that's a matter of their risk tolerance. But if you want to do it right, you need to check with the New York State Gaming Commission.
And honestly, it's not just the Gaming Commission, because even something like if you mail raffle tickets, that's theoretically not legal either.
Right, because the raffles are supposed to be done, where you're operating and who's selling them. My coworker often talks about this too. The kids who were in Little League are selling raffles. They're underage. How do you do that? You're going to tell a kid no?
The other thing that theoretically is illegal is in New York State, you can't go into debt in order to gamble. So you really can't pay for a raffle ticket with a credit card.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, right? There's so many rules. Again, I just refer people, if you're interested in learning more about raffles, bingo, any sort of games of chance, go to New York State Gaming Commission. And I'm sure you'll be surprised that there are rules and regulations about it. But, I definitely refer people there.
What about situations, as we were talking about before, like I said, if I hold a fundraising event at another location, are there things that I need to be worried about there?
So I guess it depends where you're holding. Lawyer's favorite phrase. It depends. It depends. It depends where you're holding the event.
Everything.
We love that phrase. It depends where you're doing it. Hopefully, you're doing it in an establishment that has insurance. But it's always best practice. Or here's a tip. Check with your insurance professional. Your insurance professionals really know what policies you're covered by, what policies you might need to put in place. Maybe you need a rider. Maybe you need some other umbrella policy, but you really do want to check on what the proper insurance is that you need, who's having it. Sometimes people want you to be named as an additional insured. So there's insurance is not an area that we practice in, but again, I'll refer people to those insurance professionals.
Right. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of is co-venturing. And I think that's the direction that the nonprofit sector is going to be moving in. Co-venturing, which is, sharing certain services between nonprofits, kind of collaboration.
Yeah.
And I think some of that ultimately could lead to, mergers and stuff. And I think we're expecting to see a lot more mergers happening in the nonprofit sector as we move forward than we've historically seen, because of, changes in some of the funding streams, and it's the tightening of the funding sources for the healthcare moving to managed care. And that kind of push to managed care, and some of the educational organizations. There's been a restructuring of how educational organizations are working. So, within the state education department. So there's a lot of issues that make it much, much more difficult for the nonprofit sector to do the good work that it does.
Right.
And again, I think you're going to see more co-venturing and more mergers down the road. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
And how does, what are the legal implications that they have to worry about there?
So earlier this year, we did see an uptick in mergers in Connecticut. I'm not really sure what was going on in Connecticut. I don't work in that region, but we were getting a lot more requests for mergers up there. It's always, nonprofits are always doing more with less. And sometimes it's better to merge. You can pool your resources. You can actually do more, possibly with less. So mergers are definitely a way to help organizations have a broader reach, possibly expand their services. If two organizations are doing similar things but different, they can help more people that way and maybe save some money that way.
But some of the legal challenges that come
Yeah,
into play there?
so, well, you mentioned commercial co-ventures, so that's, a little bit different.
Okay.
But with commercial co-ventures, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that might be listening, a commercial co-venture is when a nonprofit engages in sort of a fundraising adventure or experience with a for-profit. So the retailers, oftentimes, it's like, go shop for a day and this store will give 10% back of all the purchases to this nonprofit. And oftentimes you get the flyer and it says, give this flyer to the cashier and we'll take 10% and give it back to this nonprofit. We're definitely seeing a lot more of that. People are like, oh, this is great. This organization, they have so much money. Maybe they're national. They want to help us. Well, lots of red flags come up with that. Commercial co-ventures require contracts. And over the summer, the Attorney General's office, the AG's office in New York regulates charities, nonprofits. So the AG's office this summer did an enforcement action against a national charity. It was a military charity, and they were engaged in this venture, a commercial co-venture, with a jewelry retailer. So the idea of it was that the jewelry retailer was going to sell these teddy bears, and I guess it was going to have some sort of jewelry on it. And they were using the name of this nonprofit, and they were going to donate a percentage of the sales back to the nonprofit. Well, A, there wasn't a contract, and they needed to have the contract. B, there was no oversight of what the retailer was doing. So, the nonprofit would just get some checks here and there. They had no way to account for it. With nonprofits, everything is about transparency and accountability. And you need to know what people are doing, especially if you're lending your name to a for-profit business, or really to anybody. If you're going to do something with anybody, if you're lending your name, you need to kind of know what they're doing with it. So the AG's office, got involved in some enforcement action, said there was no contract, there was no oversight. They had no idea whether the money was being exchanged properly, not exchanged properly, how they were using the name. They wound up entering into a settlement agreement. And I think the nonprofit may wind up, shutting down because of that. Yeah, so definitely.
Over something innocent in terms of just trying to bring in extra money. Yeah,
innocent, right? But again, there are rules, and sometimes it's what you don't know can hurt you. So for any nonprofits out there that are thinking about, entering into these commercial co-ventures, whether it's with a restaurant, a retailer, whoever you're doing this with, just be aware that there are rules regarding that, and you need to have a contract. And again, those are contracts that we can help with. Speak to any attorney, but certainly for our clients, that's something that we can help with.
Okay. You also mentioned earlier, kind of in passing, on the website and some of the waiver releases and stuff.
Yeah. So we recommend that websites have terms of use and privacy policy. And if you're going to put something on your website, if you're going to put photos up there, you take photos in events. We love taking photos at events. We have everybody sign photo releases, video releases. So this way you have the person's permission to use their image in your materials. Without that, you really could get into trouble just posting things without permission. So, we tell people, make sure you're looking at your website, make sure you have those releases. Again, it's a typical project that we do for nonprofits.
Okay.
So we're able to help with that.
Do you also deal and help nonprofits with Nexus type issues and stuff like that when you're dealing with nonprofits who might be, because one of the big, I think, issues that you also see in the nonprofit field is, how does a nonprofit know what states they need to register in, and whether they have Nexus within that state to force them to register? So is it boots on the ground? Are they soliciting fundraising from that state? Those types of issues, because we get those questions all the time.
Okay, that's interesting that they're coming to you with those questions, right? What do we have to do? So typically, we'll get some of the questions, and it ties into the website. So on your website, you have a donate now, donate here, right? And now your website, anybody can see it wherever they are. So the general information that we give is, just having the donate now button. You don't know where people are seeing it. So if you're not actively reaching into the state, you're probably okay. Again, it depends.
Right.
It's a case-by-case basis. We work in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. So in those areas, we can advise you what you need to do to register in those states. Again, for any nonprofit who might be listening that doesn't know, if you're going to fundraise in New York, you must be registered in New York to do that.
That's right. Yeah.
And sometimes we see organizations that have not filed. What you do file is called the CHAR. The 410 is your initial filing, and the 500 is an annual statement that you file. We see organizations that, I didn't know I had to do that. Nobody ever told me. And, sometimes I wonder, like, how are people supposed to know these things? Like, you're just starting a nonprofit. How do you know that?
There's just so much information that's out there. And one of the challenges is the nonprofit sector, they really don't have typically even a starting fledgling nonprofit organization, even beyond that, an organization's been around for years. There's just so many changes that are happening on a regular basis. I mean, they're being bombarded. You were talking about employment law issues. You got the Department of Labor. You talked about the employment law side, but then you also have pension and all the pension laws that are in effect, and all the trouble that organizations are getting into. And there's been cases where organizations are being sued by their employees because they're just over pension, because we're trying to do a good thing for you, but you're suing us because we didn't provide enough education to you, or we gave you too many alternatives, or we didn't check the fee structure, or we weren't looking at the investments on a regular basis. So these are all issues. These are all issues that they're dealing with. Then you have, as you mentioned before, the governance related issues and all the stuff that can happen from a governance related perspective. You got all these little one-offs. If I want to fundraise, I want to do this, I want to do that, put up a website. You sign a contract with most nonprofit organizations receive some level of government funding. I enter into a contract with a government funder, and I sign that contract. What rules and regulations do I have? What are the ramifications to signing that contract?
Right.
It just
what
seems
records do I have to keep to be compliant?
And how long and everything else. It just seems like everything that the nonprofit sector touches creates risk, creates exposure, is another legal issue that is kind of sitting out there. Right. For them, it's almost like the world has put a bunch of booby traps out there to kind of catch the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, I don't think.
I know it's not.
Yeah,
it just feels that way sometimes.
Sometimes it does, right? And what people have to remember is that nonprofits are public charities, or the 501(c)s, 501(c)(3)s at least, are they're public charities. So again, transparency, accountability. You're accountable to the public, and it's not part of the conflict of interest policy. Is that no private inurement. You're not in this to make money for yourself. I was at, we gave a talk earlier this year about starting a nonprofit. It was called The Upsides, Downsides, and Alternatives to Starting a Nonprofit. And a woman came up to me afterwards, and she said, I've been out of work for a while, so I thought I would start a nonprofit. And I looked at her kind of like funny, and I said, well, how's that going to help you? And she's like, well, at least I'll have some income. And I said, well, where's your income coming from? Oh, well, I'm a nonprofit now, I'll be getting grants and stuff. Sometimes I think people just think, well, 501(c)(3, here's my certificate, and the money is just going to get thrown at them.
There are over 3,500 nonprofits on Long Island. You're dealing in an environment where they're all competing for the same resources.
Yeah.
It's funny because, we help nonprofits with the establishment also, and we get organizations coming in, and I spend the first 10 minutes of the conversation trying to talk them out of becoming a nonprofit organization, not because they're not going to do great work, or not because they shouldn't be a nonprofit, but there's so many organizations out there already that do so many good things. I'm sure most of them can find a nonprofit to tap into and devote their resources to helping that nonprofit. It's rare that you get the unique thing that nobody else does, but people want that control type thing.
Right. And that's something you don't understand. You don't have that control.
Right.
As the founder, you don't have that control. The nonprofit is controlled by its board of directors. And again, people don't really understand that. All of a sudden the founder is, pushed out by the board, and they're like, what do you mean? This is my baby. This is my organization.
I've seen that happen so many times.
Yes. We've heard stories too. And it's funny that you say you try and talk people out of it. So we do a great amount of counseling to people who come in and say, I want to start a nonprofit. In fact, one of the things we require when you apply for assistance and you check off that you want to start a nonprofit, we require that you have a business plan and a budget. And we won't even talk to you without it, because we want to know that you've really thought through these issues. You know, how are you going to get your money? Who's going to be on your board? What are you going to do? Have you looked at other nonprofits? Maybe sometimes you could be a program of an existing nonprofit.
Right. Yep.
You know, collaboration in the nonprofit sector is key to so many different things. But like you say, a lot of times people think, oh, I want to honor the memory of my, sister, my mom, whoever, this person they have a personal connection to it. And it's not always the best thing to do to start yet another nonprofit.
Yeah, I mean, when the moment is there, everybody's like excited about it. But 10 years, 15 years down the road, you still got to be. It's still a legal entity that's out there, supposedly doing good work.
Yeah, and that's what we tell people. Starting it is simple. You just go to the Department of State website. You just, you can fill out the form right there. You pay your fee. Boom, your nonprofit has been born, so to speak. Running the nonprofit and raising money, that's the hard part. Right. And complying with all the obligations and obstacles, that are thrown at you, that's the hard part. So, that's why I say we do a good amount of education. I didn't mention earlier, part of the services we also provide is that we do educational programs. So we do in-person presentations, and we also have a learning center tab on our website. And on that learning center, people can get access articles and webinars on a variety of different topics. And we also have a legal resource helpline that anybody can call with general nonprofit questions. So we'll provide information or referrals just to any caller.
Well, since you're talking about the legal resource, why don't you throw out the phone number for that?
So on Long Island, it's our Long Island number, which is 631-650-2312. Okay. In White Plains and the upstate area, it's 914-328-0674.
Pretty impressive, the White Plains.
Yes, I do. I call White Plains many, many times a day. We're in constant communication.
So how many times? I mean, we talked about so many different legal issues so far, and we'll talk about more, I'm sure, as they continue along here. But how often can a nonprofit organization come to you? I mean, if they develop a relationship with you, I mean, do you become their lawyer on a long-term basis, or is this really just a short-term thing? And then, because you have so many organizations out there that you need to spread the wealth.
Yep. So again, we're a nonprofit. We do have limited resources, but we typically, tell nonprofits, come back to us when you have another issue. And if we're able to assist you, again, assuming that they still financially, well, and, there are some organizations that we've done, many projects for, that whole list of issues that I gave you. We may have done one project or multiple employment projects for certain groups. We opened the Long Island office in January of 2017, so it's going on 2 years now. And I think we've helped about 60 nonprofit organizations so far just on Long Island. Wow. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Got a long ways to go. Like I said,
I know, at 3,500. So far, I'm the only attorney in the office. So 60 is, is a great number. My colleagues up in the White Plains office do help from time to time, so we do spread the wealth. But 3,500 is a big number. Again, not all of them are going to qualify for assistance. Right. But yes, there are certainly many more that don't even know about us. And I always say too, it's not a good thing to be the best kept secret. Nonprofits should not be the best kept secret.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even nonprofit. It's the fact that there's so many places where you can help organizations. There's so many things that the sector really needs help with. Yeah. And as I said, sorry, the biggest thing is a lot of these organizations just don't know what, and you said it too, they don't know what they don't know.
They don't know what they don't know, yeah.
What are you seeing? I mean, we've talked about some of the key things that you're seeing out there in the marketplace today, but what are the things that, you've seen where nonprofits have really kind of missed the boat, and you've been able to come in and really kind of set that boat, off in the right path?
Yeah. So again, I think it just goes back to, corporate governance, making sure that now they're, in compliance, that their bylaws are in compliance with the Revitalization Act, and making sure that they follow them. Now, of course, I don't go to board meetings. If I went to board meetings, I'd never be home. But explaining, these are your bylaws. Now you need to follow them. It's not enough to just say, great, now we have bylaws that are compliant. That's your governing document. So making sure you're doing that. With employment issues, for an organization that's hiring their first employee, we'll walk them through that. Here's the offer letter. Now you have to, make sure you do your federal I-9 form. You have to do, your wage disclosure. And there's a whole bunch of information just to get them on that right path. So we do a lot of we'll do the project, we'll do a little education, make sure that they're following that. We've seen organizations, like I said, I never knew I had to file a CHAR. What's a CHAR? What do you mean I have to register in New York? And so, we'll call to the Attorney General's office, making sure that we can get them on track with that. We often tell them, go back to your accountant, because we don't do those accounting pieces. So speak to your accountant. You're going to have to file. Here's something interesting. In New York, to file your CHAR 500, the AG's office does not accept the postcard version of the 990. So organizations that file that 990N can't file that with their CHAR. Now they have to prepare a 990EZ. What do you mean I have to do that? Well, the N was easy. Now what do I do?
The key issue there is there are different thresholds.
Right.
So for CHAR, we have to do a full-blown CHAR. The threshold's 25,000.
Right.
For the 990N, the threshold's 50,000. So it's that organizations that fall in that $25,000 to $50,000 gap are the ones that you're referring to, where you have the 990N for federal purposes, but that's not good enough for state purposes. So you still have to go back and do the 990EZ,
right?
In essence, to file with the state,
right? Yeah. So a lot of information about that to make sure that organizations are now complying with New York state law. The other thing sometimes, and I've only seen this, I have to say, like once or twice, thank goodness, is where organizations wind up losing their tax exempt status because they haven't filed the 990 for 3 years, automatic revocation, and then they come to us like, oh my God, I didn't even know. Now what do I do? You need to go speak to an accountant and
back and refile again.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen revocation for that. We've seen revocation because organizations are generating too much unrelated business income. So those types of issues. One of the things actually that I've seen recently, which I thought was kind of interesting, there was an instance with a nonprofit organization where there was some fraud within the nonprofit organization. And a few years later, the AG's office, the AG's office, Charities Bureau, came back to that organization and said, let me see your policies and procedures, and let me see what you've done from a control perspective to ensure that these types of problems aren't happening again.
Right.
And, if the organization didn't put in place proper controls, they were going to have a problem with the AG's office. So they had to go and create a whole policy and procedure manual and everything else that comes into play because they didn't have those things in effect.
Yeah.
So those would become, so it's, you don't realize that the trickle down impact that all of these different components have.
Right.
And, legal touches accounting, touches insurance, touches, everything, money management and, banking, and it's all interrelated.
Yeah. And especially for a nonprofit that's really small, it's hard for them. How do they even do that? How do they manage all that and work on, fulfilling its mission?
Yeah, I mean, I joke around because one of the things that we're seeing also in the nonprofit field is, a lot of these organizations that are getting government funding, the governmental agencies have been coming in to these agencies and doing audits. So it could be the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General, looking at Medicaid funding. It could be the State Controller's Office. It could be the Office of the Auditor General, or whoever their funding stream is, counties, So you've got all these audits that are taking place, and they're coming in, and they're pulling back funds, and you're in a situation where nonprofit organizations, when they're kind of establishing everything, they're out there, as you said, focused on the mission, and that's where their primary focus on. We want to do mission. We want to serve as many people as we can. We want to make as big a benefit as we possibly can, and it almost feels today that the whole world is more document driven, because of these compliance-related issues that are in fact. So you're in this situation where it's all, compliance. So, half the time you think we got to change our mission to say that we will be in compliance with all the laws and regulations that exist. And if we happen to do good service, then that's great too.
Extra.
But that's, unfortunately, it feels like that's the direction that things are moving in.
Yeah.
To what extent do you get involved with things like, HIPAA or FERPA agreements or any of that type of stuff, with organizations working with consultants and stuff like that, and the health, a healthcare type organization?
Right. So we have done a couple of HIPAA projects. Any organization that deals with protected health information, confidential patient information. We've helped with HIPAA policies. We actually had an organization who wanted to get involved in a new program, and they had to sign a contract with the entity that was going to fund them for this program. And the executive director sent me it over and said, can you get someone to review this contract for us? We just want to make sure we understand everything that's in it. And when I looked at it, I said, do you do any counseling or anything that you would have protected health information? And she said, no, why? And I said, well, there's a clause in here about HIPAA that says you're going to, keep all these records and be compliant with HIPAA and do this and this and this. And she's like, well, we're not a covered entity. We're not a healthcare provider. She said, I don't really understand why it's there. I said, okay, well, I'm going to get you an attorney to review this, but I'm also going to get somebody who knows more about HIPAA. As it turned out, the attorney who worked on it was able to negotiate that language out, because he said that by leaving it in, it was going to obligate them to have all these HIPAA policies and, save records and have other controls in place that they didn't have to do because of the work they were doing. He said it just would have made it much harder for them.
So that's a good lesson for nonprofit organizations. Just because it's in a contract that's coming from a governmental agency doesn't mean you have to sign it. There are avenues to review it and have things removed. Right.
It's not always going to happen that way, but I think, it was really understood that this organization was not, dealing with HIPAA information, so HIPAA protected information.
So you said you've worked with 60 Long Island-based agencies so far. What do you think was the coolest project you've done so far?
The coolest project? That's interesting. I have to say I like the startup aspect a lot. So recently I helped incorporate one of the groups, and the other one we had volunteer work with to incorporate them. But just working with them, they have such great ideas and passion and vision. So that's been a lot of fun, seeing them get off the ground and making sure that all their policies are in place. So that's been a lot of fun. I'm also working with an organization in the sort of like, what's the right word? They're doing scientific type work.
Like research type stuff? Or?
Some research and, I would say mostly research.
Okay.
They're in the incubator at Stony Brook.
Oh, nice.
And
this is a nonprofit?
It's a nonprofit.
Really?
Yep.
I didn't think...
I think they're the only nonprofit over there.
Wow. I thought it was for for-profit business. I didn't realize there were nonprofits in the incubator.
So there is one. I'm almost positive that that's where they are. I'm almost positive that's where they are. And so we've done a bunch of projects with them. We started with, bylaws, and then they needed a non-disclosure agreement because they were sharing like proprietary type information. So we had volunteers work on the non-disclosure agreement. And then I'm trying to think what came after that. There was, a contract review. They needed their website. Oh, this was interesting. So they needed their website reviewed, and they have in their database, they have information. They're connected to residents in England and Europe. And so GDPR came into play earlier this year. That was the new privacy regulations for the EU.
GDPR is...
don't ask
Sorry.
me. Something with data privacy review. I forget. I don't know if it's government. I don't know. GDPR. Something with data privacy having to do with
GDPR it is.
EU residents. And so we have now some volunteers. They're still working through this project, but because they have information pertaining to EU residents, they have to comply with the GDPR regulations. Okay. And so this was an entirely new, area. It's not something like, that every nonprofit has to deal with, only if you're working with information having to do with EU residents. So that's a pretty interesting project. I've been learning about that. And now, they're working on some questions, regarding intellectual property, like patents and I guess different research projects that they are entitled to do and can do, and all sorts of things like that. So it's just been really fascinating for me.
I think it's actually cool that, organizations can kind of reach out to you and not just get their domestic legal issues and state legal issues dealt with, but they can also deal with international issues because of the talent pool that you have to pull from. Yeah.
So, we're not doing the work over there, but it has an impact, Right. So yes, it is very cool that we have international law firms involved, and it's really great that we can tap into all these resources. And I have to say, like I said, we opened on Long Island in January 2017, and part of one of the challenges that we were facing was how do we get Long Island lawyers involved with us, because we really didn't have a big number of Long Island law firms involved. They really didn't even know about us. There were a handful, and the community has been, very welcoming, and we created a Long Island Advisory Committee, and so we have, different law firms and different corporations on Long Island who are now, providing volunteers for us to help work with the Long Island nonprofits. And it's nice to be able to give back to your communities. Sometimes a volunteer will reach out for a project and say, no, I didn't even know this nonprofit's like right in my backyard. I had no idea they were there and doing this work. Yeah, I'd love to help them. So that's
it sounds great. Awesome. Well, we have a question on the webinar, and sorry I have to do this, but so let's see if I can find this question. I know we have a question here. Okay, it says very interesting point about starting a nonprofit, especially having a business plan. Often we ask 2 questions of startups. Who else provides similar service programs, etc., and what is unique about your nonprofit? So this comes from Phil McAndrews from NESC.
Yeah.
So again, it's not really a question. It's really just a comment that kind of piggybacks your statement about the fact that, if you're going to be starting up a nonprofit organization, you really need to focus on, why do you want to do this? What's the purpose? Are you in it for the long haul, and everything else? So.
Yeah, because like I said, it's very easy to start it, but that nonprofit is there in perpetuity until you dissolve it. Even if you stop doing the work, you can't really do that because you still have to file that 990 every year. You still have to file your charter every year. You still have to do all those, requirements, have the policies in place. So it's important to know what you're doing.
So do you require all of the nonprofits that work with you to have a business plan, or just the startups?
The ones that are coming to us to start up. I mean, obviously it's best practice for everybody to have a business plan.
I agree.
But we're looking at the business plans for the ones that want to start up. And, to Bill's point, we do ask, have you looked at other organizations? Do you know if anyone else is out there doing it, the same type of work? And, how are you gonna be different? Why do you think you should have your, start this new nonprofit? And again, it's not your nonprofit. It's not, this is my nonprofit. It's governed by the board. So people have to keep that in mind. It's not, I start this and I'm going to hand it down to my kids. That's not the way it works with nonprofit.
So there's been a whole lot of information that we've talked about, and we're kind of getting close to running out of time. Are there any other points that you want to make sure that you get across to the listeners today in terms of either the organization, your organization, or about some things that they should be looking out for or whatever?
I think just important to keep in mind. It's not one size fits all when it comes to policies. Really, if you have a question, ask. There's no such thing. It's so everybody says, there's no such thing as a dumb question. There really isn't anything like a dumb question.
The dumb question is the one that's not asked.
Right. And it's not knowing what you don't know. So if you don't know, ask your attorney, ask your accountant, ask your insurance professional, ask somebody, because chances are if you don't know the answer, somebody else might have the answer, and somebody else is asking the same question that you want to know. So never be afraid to ask. And, we have the resource helpline. People should certainly take advantage of that. Contact us with questions. We're here to help, and we just want to get the word out about services.
Do you want to give out your email address and phone number again?
Sure.
Or web address?
Yeah. So the Long Island number is 631-650-2312. My email, if anyone wants to contact me, is mgreenberger. It's GRENBERGER @probonopartner.org. And I'm sure we'll be providing that information as well afterwards.
Yep.
But,
and I think there's another question. It says, so first of all, thank you to the person who wrote this. This is the best webinar I've ever listened to. Thank you. Is there a similar resource for financial accounting information? I'm not sure.
You're going to start that nonprofit, aren't you, Ken, right?
I'm not aware of another nonprofit that does it for
accounting.
For accounting.
I do not know.
Probably should be. So if I need help setting up that organization, will you help me?
Give me a call. We'll talk. They share business plans.
And then there was also another segment that did you say you only help with charity registration for the tri-state city area?
So Pro Bono Partnership works in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. There are other organizations that do some sort of pro bono work for nonprofits. We have a list. I don't know if it's not available on our website, but if you contact me, I can get you, point you in the right direction to find out about other states, what they do. We can't advise in other states.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll be getting out information regarding today's webinar. So in addition to having this posted so people can see it, we'll actually be sending out and posting on our website some of the questions that came up and some of the answers you gave, so that people don't have to necessarily watch through the hour webinar again. They can actually just get some of the key points of it. So,
great.
So first of all, actually, you have a couple events coming up, don't you?
Well, we have in February is the next one that's officially listed on our website. We're doing an in-person training. It's up in our White Plains office on board member roles and responsibilities. So we've done this one. My colleague Judy has done this, I think, 3 other times so far. It has sold out, I believe, every time. So hoping to bring it to Long Island. I don't have a date for it yet.
I think it's extremely important. I mean, again, we see often that board members attend board meetings, but there's very little communication as to what it is that they really should be doing. They don't know what questions, again, to be asking, what information they should be looking at. So that's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So again, like I said, we're hoping to bring to Long Island. I don't have a date yet, but stay tuned.
When
2019.
when you have a date, let us know. We'll push it out to our audiences too, and make sure that everybody's aware of what's taking place.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, Melissa Greenberger. And if everybody can tune in on January 31st for 2019, next year, for our next Cerini Nonprofit Connection, we'll be speaking with Rich Isaac from Sandler Training, who will be sharing insight on how to make the ask for those board members and fundraising people out there who find it uncomfortable to ask for money. So Rich will be here kind of talking about that. So we hope to see you next month. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Thanks.